Welcome to Successful Parenting, where we, Jackie Rue and Robin Choquette, share practical skills for families to build resilience and healthy connections. As practicing professionals and parents ourselves, we hope this podcast is a resource for parents to grow, reflect, and learn more about themselves and their children. Our approach is simple, tangible, and most importantly, we lead with compassion for the integrity of the families we serve. This podcast should not be taken as medical advice and is intended for informational purposes only. We love our work, and we can't wait to watch families gain confidence and open themselves up to new ways of successful parenting.
Hello, Robin. How's your day going?
It's going great. Doing very well today. How about you?
I'm doing good. It's a beautiful day out, and usually in summer, it tends to slow down. It seems like this summer has been staying pretty busy. So I'm excited that we're really working on a lot of great things for our upcoming podcast and just looking forward to continuing everything that we're doing.
Yeah, me too. I think today's conversation is so interesting and really love it. I know both of us are seeing more and more families that are coming in and talking about infertility and how it's impacting the families. And I think having someone come forward and talk about this, it can be a difficult conversation sometimes. It can be a conversation, I think, that's so enlightening, but at the same time really places people in a very vulnerable place to talk about it. And so I was so happy that Erin wanted to come and talk with us today. She is going to give us a great perspective on what it's like for families. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners have faced a lot of the same things that she has faced.
This is a conversation we've had a lot, and I have several friends and colleagues that this has impacted too. So I think this is going to be helpful for all those around us.
Yes, I definitely agree. Well, let's get started. Erin is a former professional at a Big Four consulting firm. She is now a mother of 3 young children. And as a former D1 track and field athlete, Erin competed at the highest level in hurdles and sprints. Her and her husband have had some fertility struggles. She is here just to kind of share some of those ups and downs in the process that she has gone through. Welcome, Erin.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today and talk about this issue with you guys.
Yeah, we really appreciate it because I know this is private, and to come forward to talk about it, we just really appreciate it and really honor the journey that you have been on and that has impacted you and your family. And we just thank you so much for coming and talking today. If you don't mind, just share with us your journey and any information that you would be comfortable in sharing with our listeners just about kind of what's happened for you and your family.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Robin, I competed in track and field, and I competed for a long time, very diligently, to the point where the female athlete triad just kind of seemed normal. And it wasn't until about 2018, a couple years after I had graduated college, when I spontaneously became pregnant with my daughter. 2017, when I became pregnant with my daughter and had a successful pregnancy and birth, and kind of the follow-up to that, everything was, normal and fine. And I went for a regular thyroid visit just to check on a condition I currently, had been managing, and ended up finding some other issues that would affect potentially pregnancies to come, and was referred to a reproductive endocrinologist. And that's a doctor that really works with women and men on pregnancies and infertility issues. Worked with her, did 3 different cycles of IUI, and I luckily quickly got pregnant with my son, Nathaniel. However, I will say throughout that process and kind of going in blindly, I felt really confused. I kind of had this, why me attitude. I didn't expect it, especially after surprisingly having a child, my first. I didn't expect any of this. I was lucky in 2020, as I mentioned, I had my son. And 6 months later, knowing the process we had gone through for our second, we quickly decided we did want a third. We didn't want to wait too long. This is when our process got a little bit more difficult, and I would say hard. Not that the first time wasn't, but my third child was a lot more challenging. So as I mentioned, we started when my second was 6 months old, and that was kind of towards the middle of 2020. In late 2020, I got pregnant, but I had a miscarriage, and that was really devastating for me. It definitely felt like a low. I didn't really know how I would bounce back from it. We did keep trying. And then early in 2021, while we were going through treatment still, my dad suddenly passed away. So that really kind of
Oh,
added
wow.
to the stress we were already facing. I didn't feel like I was physically or emotionally in a spot that I probably should have been continuing fertility treatments. But,
Mhm.
when you're so far in it, you don't want to stop.
Yeah.
So we didn't. And then that next month, I actually developed OHSS during my treatment, which is ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and ended up in an ambulance at the hospital getting emergency surgery. So after that, we kind of took a pause. I needed to digest what had been happening. We had 2 children at home, one who had just left the hospital after a week of being on oxygen for pneumonia. I had had all these different things happen, and we ended up also switching doctors. So this kind of brings us to the summer of 2021 after a really stressful 7-8 months. And we had switched doctors, we had switched medications, and I ended up pregnant with my third in August and had a healthy baby in 2022. So it was quite the road to get there. Lots of ups, lots of downs. But fortunately, I can look back and be so grateful for my 3 kids.
Yeah. Can you explain to our listeners IUI?
It's basically being artificially inseminated. It's not the IVF treatment where you have the surgical procedure of putting the embryo together using the egg and the sperm. It's a process where you're just artificially inseminated through a catheter with your partner's sperm.
Oh, okay.
I just so appreciate you sharing this story, Erin, because I think for so long it was not talked about as openly. And I know I've had many women parents say to me how much stress they felt under. They would get married and everyone would say, like, when are you having children? When are you having children? Are you going to have children? How many are you going to have?
Right.
When you're struggling to have a child, many, have said to me, like, they almost felt like something was wrong with them. They felt guilty. They felt shame. And I think being able to have this conversation openly is just so helpful for so many. I really appreciate you today. And I appreciate you being on here, because the more we learn and the more I think we're coming forward and we're hearing stories, the more we kind of see some of the data, right? Like, I know the CDC reported, I think it was 2019, that infertility affects 10% of women between the ages of 15 and 44. So that's a pretty big age range. And we see that it really does impact all women. I think we have this notion that you should just be able to get pregnant whenever you want. And for many, it's not that easy. And so it can be really painful when you're continually asked those questions. And I had a good friend too that it was impacted where she could not have children and they were continually asked. And I know at one point Jennifer Aniston came out and talked about in terms of she chose her career over having children. And she said, the assumptions people make around childbirth are really difficult. They're not always accurate either. It's so complex. The more we learn, the more I think we can be more mindful and support one another. When is the time to make the decision to seek more information and to learn about fertility treatment? And where does one start?
Yeah. I think within some level, it's a personal decision. I definitely recommend starting with your OBGYN or your primary care doctor if you have concerns. Not being afraid to raise those questions and have those conversations, which can be difficult.
Mhm.
As you said, there's a lot of shame behind them. And there's definitely that element of, I'd rather just keep trying and, we'll see. Or, people will say, oh, just don't stress about it. It'll happen. And I think not being afraid after whether that's, 4, 6, 12 months, whenever you kind of are like at the point where it's impacting both you and your relationship, I see no harm in touching base with your doctors. In regards to, finding someone that fits your needs and where you start, as I said, start with the primary care OB. In regards to finding a doctor that fits your needs, I personally recommend interviewing. I think getting a second opinion, meeting 1 or 2 different doctors is incredibly important. As someone that has ran into issues and did end up switching and finding someone that fit our needs better. Infertility is a lot. It's a lot of information. It can be extremely overwhelming, and it's a process. There's a financial aspect, there's a physical and emotional aspect. So I think kind of having someone that fits what your family is looking for. I also would highly recommend combining a MD with a therapist. Going through that process is a lot, and taking care of your emotional needs through the process is a big part of it.
Yeah.
You raised an interesting point that I've thought about before. It can, be mindful of the stress it can put on the relationships. I think, I like how you noted that, because I do think that's important.
Definitely. Absolutely.
And it's not uncommon, from what I understand, to switch doctors. So often people think, well, I'm in this, I've been doing it with one particular doctor, I just don't feel comfortable, but we're just going to keep doing it. And I don't think there's anything wrong, right, Erin, to say, I think we would just be more comfortable with someone else. And I like, you said interviewing is really important because it is this broad thing. It's not just a medical thing. There's so much involved, and being able to find someone that you could really relate to and connect with, I think is probably so important in the process.
I 100% think so. And I think some of the best ways to find these doctors are talking to people, whether it's anonymously on a Facebook group or through friends, or even, as I mentioned, your OB, asking for those referrals and recommendations. I think is a really good way, other than just Googling or looking online, to find a doctor that has had success with certain types of procedures or works with, certain types of patients. There's so many different diagnoses that kind of meeting those different doctors and seeing who, fits with you is a really good idea. And I also can't recommend enough, through my own faults, looking back, of getting all of the testing done, the blood test. There's this procedure called I want to say it's a hysterectogram. Or short for HSG. Whatever your doctor recommends, I highly recommend doing it at the start of the process to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success, whether that be the type of medication they choose or the type of procedure, whether that is an IUI or the IVF route. Just really making sure that you're being thorough, because I know a lot of people, including myself, are like, oh, I just want to get started. This is a long process. We've been trying. I'm ready to have a baby now and be pregnant now. But as someone that has quickly jumped into it and had to later on go back and take a pause and kind of almost restart, making sure that you're, really putting in the legwork early by choosing the correct doctor for you and getting the correct testing done, I think sets you up for success long term.
Yeah. And I think it is such a personal thing. And I know several couples I've worked with, they've decided not to share a lot of information with family members or close friends. They may give a little bit of information, but so often the questions are often asked, like you guys were saying earlier, are you pregnant? What's going on? And really wanting to dive in it. And sometimes you just don't want to talk about it. And then if something happens, sometimes you end up having to consult, grandma of, it's okay, we're going to keep trying. And, you're really struggling, but you're having to take care of others. Is there any suggestions that you have for our listeners about making and keeping boundaries with others that are in your life?
Definitely. The questions can be hard. As you mentioned, having people ask, are you having more kids? Or even seeing a pregnancy announcement on social media. It can be a huge trigger for someone going through infertility. So my first suggestion is never ask people when they are having kids.
Yes.
It's just like, don't ask people if they're pregnant. Just don't. They'll tell you if they want to.
Yes.
The second thing, which it took me a long time to get to this point, is finding your tribe. It felt so shameful, especially, after the miscarriage, which also felt shameful, to be in fertility treatments. The first 2 journeys for me, I kept hidden. It was like a deep, dark secret for me, and even from those people closest to me. And honestly, I think looking back, it made the process that much harder, and it put a lot of stress on my husband and I and our marriage, because he was the only one who knew, but he also knew from the male perspective. And it's just not quite the same as someone who is physically experiencing it. Not to knock him or take anything away from that. Yeah. It has its own struggles by, being on the outside, but when you are the person physically going through it, it's a different game. And this time, I'll share, we're going through it again. We want one more child. And going through it this time, I have found different friends and a bigger tribe that supports me outside of my husband. And it has been so helpful to have these people that understand what I'm going through, or that I can shoot a quick text off to and say, have you heard from this doctor about this, or things like that. And the crazy thing for me is I've opened up to others about my journey, that I found so many more people that are going through it. It's wild. It's like the club you never wanted to be a part of end up in. But the people that I have met and grown closer to, and that don't judge and understand, it's made this brutal process. I can't even say easier because it doesn't really get easier, but it's less lonely.
Yes.
It has to be at times feel like a roller coaster ride, right? So find your tribe. I like that. Find the people that will support you. Find the people that you can trust, because I agree with what you said. If you rely on your spouse, what are the effects of that?
I think there's this resentment that grows because, you're going through it and you're physically up and down just from medication alone, let alone the emotional side of the guilt that you feel as, the person going through it of why isn't this working or why didn't this month work? When you're relying that solely on your spouse, there's just that resentment that grows, there's that anger that grows. And then, you are taking this marriage or friendship and it's almost becoming like a business. It just becomes so mechanical that you lose kind of that romance and fun element of your marriage because you two are going through this together, but you're going through it separately as well. And when you don't have other people to lean on, your spouse can turn into not only your support, but you kind of lose sight of that friendship.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you would say would be helpful besides like finding your tribe? Do you have any other suggestions that you would say to our listeners if they are finding themselves in a similar situation?
In regards to kind of going through the journey or in regards to
In regards to going through the journey, feeling alone.
riding the roller coaster?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that you phrased it that way with the roller coaster because when I started up with treatments again, I sent my friend a picture of like one of the, what do they call them? The memes of someone on a roller coaster. And I was like, here we go. That's the best way I think to describe it. My greatest piece of advice for anyone is don't let the highs or the ups get you too up or the downs get you too down. You kind of need to ride the middle. During the highs, I try really hard to be grateful and thankful for the small wins. They're there. It's tough. And then during the downs, I really go back to why I started. I go back to my athlete mentality because I really think that they're related. You need the stamina, you need the grit. As a hurdler, I've fallen a lot of times, but I've learned to get up and I finished. And you have to remember your long-term goal when you're going through the adversity and facing these setbacks, which, you're not going to win every race. You most likely, You're not going to have success every cycle. After a bad cycle, I give myself a day to cope. Not necessarily a bad cycle, but if I'm not pregnant, I take my day, whether I want to go for a long run or lay in bed or treat myself to a fancy coffee, whatever I need, I give myself that day. And after that day is over, it's game time. After a lot of my track races, or at the end of them, my dad would often be heard yelling the word finish, meaning, give it all you have, don't quit. Right at the end. And that's kind of the word I cling to during these processes. If I hang in there, I'm going to eventually get my W. So when I restart a cycle, I'm literally telling myself, okay, just finish, just keep going, get through this cycle. And I think kind of having that mentality has been really helpful for me.
I like it. So a lot of self-care and knowing what you can do.
Yep.
Put some structure around your self-care. And, I always say it's okay if you want to have a pity party, but you've got to, like you said, set some structure around it. It's okay. When we're feeling that sadness and we're grieving, we have to give ourselves that opportunity to experience it. And then it's a lot about the mindset is what I'm hearing you say.
I think so. It is a lot about your mindset, and it's a lot about being able to handle the downs by thinking about the long-term goals. For me, at least, is how I get through it, of when something isn't going exactly the way I thought, which is pretty much everything in infertility. If you think it's going to go one way, it doesn't. So I think being able to long-term look at what I'm trying to do, keep that in mind, helps me through the process. But definitely the self-care element as well. I think it's really important to make sure that you're, being gentle with yourself because you're going through a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you talked about finding your tribe, and I love that. How do you go about finding your tribe? I mean, you said maybe some Facebook groups or whatever. We've all joined some and been like, oh my, we quickly back out of that puppy. How do you go about doing that?
Yeah.
Any suggestions to our listeners?
I think it's a slow, methodical process. I think you need to be vulnerable and kind of make the decision of who you're going to, try to let into your tribe, whether that's a parent or a sibling or a close friend. And then as you slowly have a few supports, you can kind of get more confident. And I've been at the park on play dates, and I don't know, I can't even tell you now how it's come up, but it has. And and saying like, oh, I see this doctor, and someone saying, oh, I just saw them last month, and kind of having those organic conversations. But I think those organic conversations come from kind of gaining that confidence to lose the shame with infertility. Because once you understand that it's not your fault, that there isn't shame behind it, and that you shouldn't feel guilty, the more likely you are to talk about it and to say, this is something that is impacting me. Once you're able to kind of have those conversations, I feel like for me, I was shocked at how many people are going through it and how many relationships I was able to form just through being honest.
Being open and being, I guess, open and vulnerable are the two that I hear, but definitely just being open in the moment and being present, and things just kind of happen. I
100% would agree. I haven't had a ton of success on the Facebook groups, like you said. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this is too much information. I try really hard to stay out of the detailed information and kind of just let the doctors, because I could sit there and look at the numbers or anything all day, but it's all consuming. So I feel like just being able to organically talk about it, or not being shameful of it, has helped me grow my tribe.
Yeah. Well, and everyone struggles, right? Social media makes it seem like everybody's just kind of coasting along and happy. And I think it is really true. We all have our own struggle. And the more we can be real and transparent, it helps others, because we don't always know where someone else is in their journey, right?
100%. And I guess another tip I would say is I get off social media during fertility treatments. I just avoid it like the plague. It doesn't bring anything positive to my life. And it makes me more likely to compare where I'm at to where someone else is at. And it just doesn't seem to uplift me at all. And when you're going through something like fertility treatments, you need to be surrounding yourself with things that make you feel good, not make you feel worse.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much again for sharing today. It's always insightful, because I think sometimes, and I'm sure I've done it too, have, made a comment without thinking, and you don't realize all the time when you're saying something like, oh, are you guys going to have children, how that impacts somebody is struggling, or maybe someone doesn't want children. I think there's shame in that. We have this tendency to be judgmental. Like, what do you mean you don't want children? It really is such an individual choice that I think the more we talk about it, the more, I know I educate myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you ready, Erin, for our 3 questions?
I'm ready.
Okay, so you can answer 1, 2, or all 3.
Okay.
Number 1, tell us one of your funny parenting stories. Now, this can be from your childhood, or this could be you as a parent. Number 2, what TV, family, or movie would you want to be a part of, and why? And number 3, what does successful parenting mean to you? So you can answer 1, 2, or all 3, whatever you want. What do you think?
I'm going to jump into number 2. What TV, family, or movie would you want to be a part of, and why? I always wanted to be a part of the Cheaper by the Dozen family. I always had 12 kids, and I joke that this is God's way of making sure that doesn't happen. But I grew up in a busy, chaotic, competitive household, and it's just something I always wanted for myself. It's kind of finding that love through the chaos and knowing that you have that support behind you when you go out into the world, and kind of that place to call home base, and something I always wanted for myself.
I like it.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Well, this was helpful. We want to continue this conversation. We've actually had a lot of listeners request this topic in particular. It just reminds us of we're each on our own journey, and being mindful that we're really here to support one another. And I love how you said to stay off social media, because whenever I'm dealing with something difficult in life, I do try to stay off of it, because it doesn't usually make me feel more encouraged. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
Yes. And Erin, thank you. You're vulnerable today and sharing with us. And I love a lot of the things that you gave us. Finding your tribe, as Jackie said, being off of social media, just being open and being present in the moment. You're going to be able to find those people to support you, and finding ways to take care of yourself. I love it all. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you. And have a great day, everyone. Have a great day, Robin.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us, and make sure to subscribe and like us to catch our next episode, where we will take you on a journey to find new ways of successful parenting.